After the results of my last video, where everybody was eager to let me know that I am, in fact, bad at video games, and the ink mines aren't good in Splatoon 1, I've decided for my next topic I should probably cover something I know more about than the Splatoon 1 meta. So how about a video about none other than Mother, my favorite game of all time? I suppose the official title is Earthbound Beginnings, but in my honest opinion, I think that name is pretty lame. Earthbound Zero is a way better one, if I must be honest. I think the most well-known thing about this game is that it was going to be released in America in 1990 or so, but then after fully finishing the prototype and fully translating it, they just never released it. This ROM was leaked and circulated around the internet for years until in 2015 when Nintendo did something very not Nintendo and just released it officially on Wii U VC. I honestly still can't believe this happened. It's such a non-Nintendo move to release an unreleased game like this. But yeah, there's a lot of changes made rather than just a simple quick and dirty translation, so I'll be going over all, or at least most of them in this video. Side note, because it technically had its first official release in 2015, on the Nintendo Switch Online timeline that shows the release date of every game on the service, it just says it released in 2015, not 1989 or anything like that. I just think that's weird. Also, this official box art sucks! For clarity, for the rest of this video I'll be referring to the original Japanese Famicom release of the game as the Famicom version, the original English release that came out for Wii U and Switch as the NES version, and the often forgotten GBA port, Mother 1+2, as the GBA version. So there's your small history lesson on the release of this game. Let's get to what the video is actually about. I recently replayed the whole game on the NSO Famicom service because I'd never played the Japanese Famicom version all the way through. There's an astonishing amount of changes and differences. We'll start off with the one that probably everybody already knows about, the different enemy sprites. Crows, Gang Zombies, Shroudly, BB Gang members, Teddy, Dr. Distorto, Joanna, Kelly, and Nancy all have censored sprites. The Crows and Gang Zombies are probably the best known ones since they're pretty early in the game, but I didn't actually know about Joanna, Kelly, and Nancy. They all have exactly one pixel change to make their chests less pronounced, I guess? I don't know, this one's a blink and you miss it difference. Speaking of blink and you miss it differences, Dr. Distorto, my old pal. What good times we had in Duncan Factory. This one makes even less sense. Originally his coat had what looked to be a red pen in his coat pocket, but in the English version it's removed. I've heard some people say it looks like it could be interpreted as a blood splotch on his coat, but I don't really see it. The final two are the BB Gang members and Teddy. The gang members got the Crow treatment and got their smoking privileges revoked, while Teddy got his knife taken away. Unlike the last two, these make a little more sense. By the way, side note, in the Japanese NSO re-release of the Famicom version, all the enemy sprites are changed to be the one from the NES version. Did you know the Famicom version didn't have a run button? If you've ever played or even seen footage of it, you could probably figure this. In the NES version, they added a run button, which basically just overclocks the NES and makes everything run at double speed, including cutscenes. This wasn't in the original Famicom release, but was added in the Mother 1+2 GBA port that Japan got, although it works differently. It's just a normal run button there, just making your character speed up, no effect on cutscenes. The GBA port also doesn't work on a grid, unlike the original NES/Famicom versions. It instead has free movement, like Mother 2 and 3. The Famicom version has a completely different layout in the crystal caverns in Magicant from both the NES and the GBA versions of the game. It used to be a lot more winding and less linear, and the dragon was a lot more out of the way in the Famicom version. I'm pretty sure that only the PSI Stone gift box is in the Famicom release, rather than having the Magic Herb, a PSI Stone, and a Sword gift box in the other releases. Also, if you incorrectly answer to the Forgotten Man that you are also a Forgotten Man, in the Famicom release, he'll send you back to the beginning of Magicant, while in the NES and GBA versions, he just denies you and makes you start all over. The Famicom release had an item called the Time Machine, which you could purchase from that weird teacher who lives in the elementary school. There's an event that would trigger upon purchase where the room would blow up, like after you give Lloyd the bottle rocket. This item was replaced in later releases with the Super Bomb. The Super Bomb is a PK Omega of fire in the form of an item that only Lloyd can use. I think you can still get the Super Bomb in the Famicom version as a drop from the Star Miner, but I'm honestly not sure. It's hard to tell if it's not in the game or if it's just not dropping, so I'm just gonna assume that it's not. Another item that was changed in the NES version is the Friendship Ring. In the Famicom version, you could buy this item called the Friendship Ring, but it didn't really do anything. In the NES and GBA versions, this is replaced by an item called the Repel Ring, which is supposed to lower enemy encounter rates, but never actually had it do anything. Ninten's mom, the Glasses Lady, the Pigpen Child, and the Priest all have slight changes in their overworld sprites. Ninten used to have a black stripe on his shirt, Ninten's mom's hair was different, the Glasses Lady used to look more like Marcy from Peanuts, the Pigpen Child used to have more dirt around their sprite, and the Priest used to have a cross around his neck. But then, something brand new I just found out, in the NES version, both of the NPCs that wear suits have 1 pixel removed from their sprites. I have no clue why this was changed, I highly doubt anyone would have noticed this. I had to look really hard to see what the difference was, and even then it was confusing. The last 2 sprite changes I'd like to mention are the title screen and the crosses. The title screen in the Famicom version obviously says Mother, but the NES version says Earthbound. The textiles are different, as the Famicom version is yellow and has a bit of shading, while the NES version just is stark red with very little detail. As for the last sprite changes, in typical Nintendo of America fashion, any and all symbols of religion have been removed in the NES version. This removed any crosses from any sprites in the game, like gravestones and the coffins you look for Pippi in. Alright, let's get back to the cool stuff. You guys like glitches, right? I like glitches. I like them a lot. First we have the breadcrumb glitch, which is an interesting case to say the least. In the Famicom version, if you give Pippi bread and make her start leaving a trail of breadcrumbs, then return her to the mayor, then go back to her later and get the breadcrumbs back, then follow the breadcrumbs to the head of the trail, whoa, you'll end up in the gray grass zone. I have a limited understanding of how this works, but from what I can gather, when you use the breadcrumbs it saves your current coordinates on the huge connective map of Mother into memory. When you use them with Pippi and then she leaves your party, it doesn't know where she is anymore and sets the breadcrumb coordinates to 00 on the map, which is out of bounds. When you get them back from her and use them, it just sends you to 00 and you end up in the gray grass zone. This glitch was fixed in the NES release and was technically fixed in the GBA one, but not quite. You see, I mentioned earlier that your movement is no longer fixed to a grid in the GBA version, which doesn't really affect the game at all in much cases, with one exception. You can slip through this little gap right here with your less limited movement, which leads to an area you're not supposed to get to. Because this part of the area overlaps with an out-of-bounds area on the huge interconnected map, if you use the bread and then follow the breadcrumbs on this exact spot, you can still slip into the gray grass zone. I actually found a setup for getting to the final area from this out-of-bounds glitch, and you can use this to skip all the melodies in the GBA version. Unfortunately, there's nothing of the sort in the NES version. There's a few more glitches present in the Famicom version actually, such as the fleabag glitch. I could explain this one, however I believe the video my friend Tracy made does a much better job of doing so I recommend you go watch their video about it. I'll link it in the description. The basic synopsis of this though is that if you use the fleabag item in an unwinnable fight, such as any of the R7037 fights, then continue the fight for 255 turns, the battle will just end and you can skip having to actually lose the fight. This can have some weird effects, such as letting you take Eve outside of Mount Etoy, which has some weird effects in and of itself. This glitch is only in the Famicom release and was patched in both the NES and GBA versions. The last glitch I want to talk about is a cool one, the Flying Man outside of Magic Ant glitch. This one is present in both the Famicom and NES versions, which is cool. Again, Tracy made a great video about this one, so I recommend watching that. To keep it brief though, if you save in Magic Ant, set your breadcrumbs somewhere else, die in a battle, get a Flying Man, and then use your breadcrumbs, you can keep the Flying Man in places you're not supposed to. It's a neat glitch, but I couldn't do it justice. Just go watch Tracy's video, okay? You know, I don't think we've talked about Magic Ant enough in this section, so why not include more Magic Ant topics by talking about the benevolent old man? Yeah, I bet you didn't know this guy existed. He's a pretty obscure NPC who appears at the fountain if you use telepathy on it. He's a pretty useful guy in the NES and GBA versions, as he acts like an ATM in an area without a proper one. However, in the Famicom version, he's a lot lamer. Instead of giving you money, he will give you the option to cure poison or cure the stone status. Yeah, not as useful, considering the fact that there are 3 other ways to heal in Magicant, including the fountain he appears right in front of. I'm honestly glad they changed this. It makes this obscure NPC have a useful purpose. Alright, that's enough Magicant for now. Let's talk about Mount Itoy. This area was called Holy Lowly Mountain in the Famicom and GBA versions. In fact, a lot of areas have different names in those versions. They're all named after holidays and holiday-adjacent things. I honestly prefer the names in the NES version. They're a lot more unique and sound like real places. A few personal favorites are Podunk, Reindeer, Spokane, and the Mislay Triangle. But right, back to Mount Itoy. After getting beat up by R7038, Teddy gets severely injured and Lloyd comes to the rescue. Teddy is then replaced by Lloyd in the party, and Teddy ends up dying in the Famicom release. Mount Itoy caves were completely different in the Famicom version, as it was swapped with the cave leading to the Geek fight. In the Famicom version, once you learn the 7th melody from Eve's broken body, you're taken directly to Queen Mary and Magicant, and she remembers the final melody on her own. In the GBA and NES versions, you instead learn the final melody from George. You also need to go visit Mary yourself in the NES and GBA versions, which adds to the tension of the scene a little bit more in my opinion. Also, finally, some GBA exclusive content. Once Eve gives you the 7th melody in that version, you also get an item called the Memory Chip, which lets you teleport to Eve's broken body at any time, similar to the Onyx hook. Alright, we're coming to the end of the video now. I suppose I'll round us off with whatever extra stuff I couldn't find a place for anywhere else. The Famicom version doesn't have any visual effect for when you learn a melody. The NES version has an effect, and the GBA version makes the effect more visually detailed. In the Famicom version, the blue and red warning outlines appear on party members' names, while in the NES version it appears on their HP. In the GBA version, it instead makes the party members' names a different color. In the Famicom version, the check command in battle just shows the enemy's stats, while in later versions it gave them flavor text. The check feature for items was also added in versions after the Famicom release. There's a setup feature in the NES version where you can set the start, select, and B buttons to different features, as well as changing the text speed. The text speed feature was also added in the GBA version, but you can only change it while you're in battle. The world map is an item in the Famicom version, and you get it in the basement instead of the bread. And that's about it. There might be some stuff that I missed, but for now I think I've covered everything I want to. I didn't actually realize just how many differences there are until doing deeper research for this. I utilized a very helpful page on the Mother Forever website detailing a lot of changes I missed in my playthrough, which I'll link in the description. It's a pretty interesting read. I also referenced a lot of the info that is on the Mother page of starmen.net, specifically the sprite differences. And of course, I highly recommend Tracy's videos about the fleabag and flying man glitches. Alright, that's gonna be it for me. I'll catch you later.